Welcome to Resilience Talk, hosted by Paul Spencer of Second Nature Solutions. Let's dive in.
When I first started working with family-owned businesses, almost not quite 10 years ago now, which seems like a ton of time ago. One thing that I would learn from them is they wanted to, and they used this word, they wanted to hold some of the people around them more accountable. And they would use the accountable word. Paul, how do I hold my operations person more accountable? How do I hold my delivery team more accountable? How can I be more accountable for the salespeople of delivering what they say they're going to deliver? And so what that meant for me, listening and kind of interpreting that, is they didn't always trust that the people doing the work, or whatever role they were describing, that they were doing what they should be doing. How about that? And so I always thought it was a strange question, and it didn't quite resonate with how I thought about leading people and moving teams and getting teams to be more productive. Very rarely, if at all, use the word accountable. And so that's what I want to talk about today is what is accountability and what are we really after? When we say we want to hold somebody accountable, what are we really after? What is our aim? And I would say that our aim is really about productivity or being efficient or getting things done, right? It's really mostly about execution. And so what does it mean to hold somebody to execute, right? Whether I'm delegating that, meaning I have a team below me or I'm responsible for, let's call it a department or a group of 20 people, 100 people below me, I'm not going to be doing all of that work and I'm not executing all of that work, but I'm still held accountable for the outcomes of that team or that department. And really, in the end, it's all about execution. And so how do we execute? That's the question. Paul, how can we get better at executing? And the distinction there, it's very subtle, but I think it's really important because the shift is how do we execute, meaning how? What is, if we think about Deming, by what method? By when? By who? Those are some of the questions that will be asked in order to how to better execute. Well, what method are you using? What processes are in place? How are those processes working well with each other? How are they not working well with each other? Who's involved? What roles are in play? What's the timing between processes, between roles? What's the expectations between those timings? And what is necessary for the information from one process to another from a timing perspective in order for those things to flow well? That is how you execute. The other one, the original question, is how do I hold you accountable? How do I hold so-and-so accountable is a person question, meaning how do I get Paul to buy in? How do I get Paul to actually do the work that I'm paying him for, right? How do I get Paul to make sure that he's doing everything that I've asked him to do because he's dropping a lot of things, right? Those are two different problems, and they're actually two different mindsets on how you solve the aim, which is efficiency. It's being productive. It's executing. And so if you start with the accountability, if you start with the person, how do I fix Paul? How do I get Paul more motivated? Paul's not motivated. How do you know that? How do you know Paul's not motivated? Well, I don't think he's very accountable for the things that I tell him to do. Interesting, right? That's an interesting observation. So the point of the conversation here is shift your mindset to process over people, and you will get closer to your aim, which is executing, which is productivity, which is outcomes. And with those outcomes, we can get to places where we start to learn. And so this is the other part of the accountability part is, from my perspective, interacting with you, the owner. You're saying, I want to better hold so-and-so accountable. Okay. So now maybe I will get some better understanding of what that means from you. And ultimately, I would say 10 times out of 10, that means execution. So what is it that you want to be executing on? What are those outcomes that you're looking for? And then I can go and talk with so-and-so, whoever that is. And what I will find 10 times out of 10 is that from their perspective, they're being pulled in multiple directions. The owner has actually told them to go do this thing, and then it doesn't take 24 hours or less that the owner has told them to go do this other thing. And then before you know it, but before the week is even over, the owner has tampered with the work, the execution of that particular person multiple times. And so that person is being pulled in multiple directions, doesn't quite understand the different priorities given to him by the owner, and therefore is not very accountable, right? And so then the other part of it too is from the let's just call them the executive's perspective, dealing with the owner, is there aren't any clear expectations on how things should work, how things should operate. It's just go do it. And so what happens is I may be a good executor, but I may be inconsistent in executing because of the dynamic of, say, our customers have high variation, or the dynamic of how we deliver, or maybe just the dynamic of our industry in general. And so what the owner is observing is that Paul's just not very good at executing. He's not accountable. And what I would say is that Paul, as the executive, is not very consistent in his execution because of the variation of everything that I just described. And so therefore, that is a process issue. It's not a Paul issue. It's not a person issue. It's a process issue. Anyway, so that is where you start. If this leaks out of your mouth, how do I hold somebody accountable? Then you should stop, reflect. Why am I asking this? And then ask it a different way, which is, how do we get better execution? And I guarantee you, you will end up with a different outcome, right? I'm not talking about the execution outcome. I'm talking about the interaction you will have with that other executive. The interaction that you will have on how can we better execute will be way different than I need to hold you accountable. All right. One other topic on this too is when we go into how do we execute, and the executive is now thinking, excuse me, the executive is now thinking about processes over the people and trying to get more consistent in his work, meaning in order to do that, I have to come up with guidelines about how we do our work, how I do my work, how my team executes, how we deliver, how my sales team goes out and finds new prospects. Now we need to be more consistent with how that occurs. That doesn't mean we have to be more rigid. Process is not rigidity. Process is consistency. And so that I can be more predictable in the outcomes, right? If I'm more consistent, then I can better predict the outcomes of whatever process that is. And so when I'm doing that, I have to be willing to experiment. And I know we've talked about this a million times about the word experiment, and how scary that can be. But it's meant to be a way of learning so that we can find the optimal process. So if I'm to take an idea and write down, I could be even an expert, right? I've done lots of sales processes, and I can write that down, and I give you that piece of paper and say, here you go, execute on this process. Now, that's probably 50%, maybe 80% of the way there, just based on my experience and my knowledge about how things go. But it's not going to be 100% there, because you and your team and your business and your customers are different. And so you have to take that process and then you have to go execute it. But then you also have to be willing to experiment with it, which says, hey, we're going to approach our customers with this messaging on this time frame through this channel. We're going to offer at this price during this time frame, and be willing to do that, so that, because what happens when you do that, you learn, and the customer will not buy your product at that price point, will not offer an opportunity to extend the service beyond the quarter or beyond the year or beyond the month, right? And so what does that do? That's not a failure. That is an opportunity for us to ask questions on why and gather feedback, and then for us to be able to adjust either the way we sell, the way we message, either our channels or the way we deliver or our product, right? And so you can see that in order for us to solve the problem of being accountable, we have to ask, how are we executing? And then when we get into the execution, it's not a one and done thing, and it never will be. Even when I figure it out, it's always going to change, because there's always chance to opportunity for improvement. That's only if everything stays static around me, and we know that that's not true and it's impossible. So even if I get to optimal, I know that my customers are going to change, the economy is going to change, my industry is going to change. And so therefore, I'm constantly experimenting and adjusting and finding optimal within my execution. That, my friends, is how you hold somebody accountable.